Disclaimer: the views expressed on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek are solely the opinions of the host and the guest. The content of the conversation is not reflective of the institutions or establishments mentioned therein. Take all these opinions with a pinch of salt and a dash of lime if needed. Namaskara, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening, and welcome to this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. My guest this week is Dr. Desiree Hill. Dr. Hill is a professor at the University of Central Oklahoma in the Mass Communications Department. In this episode, we cover a wide range of topics associated with the news, narratives that are spewed today in the news, and about the sort of traumas that journalists tend to go through in their career of reporting a wide range of stories. So there's a ton that you'll get to take away from this episode and a lot to learn. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Hill on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. Hey, Dr. Hill, how's it going?
Great. How about you?
I'm doing good. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So before we get started, if you could let everybody know who Dr. Hill is, what do you do, what do you like, if you have any dislikes, and so on. Yeah, just a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, what I do, I work at UCO. I am an assistant professor of broadcast media. I teach journalism. I teach focus on broadcast journalism, focus on video. I am the advisor for the student newscast. And I think that when you ask me what I do, that's what I think about is basically newscasts. That's kind of been my life for the last few decades. I've been working with newsrooms really ever since I was 13 years old. So that's kind of the thread that connects everything. Even though now I'm at a university, I used to work in a newsroom, I've had that thread going. So that's what I like. I like news, I like information. So that might kind of give you a clue into what I don't like. I don't like lies. I don't like anything that's false. I don't like artificiality. So those are some things that I think define me a little bit.
Gotcha. And you said 13 years old.
Yes.
What got you interested into like media and journalism at such a young age?
Well, I'll tell you, it's pretty. It's something that I think a lot of people will relate to. Is around that time, I was in 8th grade. I read The Diary of Anne Frank. And have you read that book?
I actually have not.
Okay, I recommend it. Of course, you're older, so it'll affect you differently than it did me. But at age 13, I read this book that this young girl had written, Jewish girl in hiding from the Nazis for, trying to survive. And it was her journal, basically. And I read this journal, and it was so powerful that it had, kind of reverberated around the world and landed. I grew up in Arkansas, which is right next door to Oklahoma. This girl that was hiding in the Netherlands at the time. And I'm reading this book that she wrote when she was about my age or younger even. And I thought, I want to be a writer. It had such a profound impact. Of course, her life, she died in a concentration camp. I'm not Anne Frank, but I just wanted to write. And so in my junior high school, we had a class called journalism. And I saw that and I thought, well, I can write, I can learn how to write. And so I took that class. It wasn't really about writing fiction or writing a book. It was about writing news. Regardless, that started me on my journey. So I always think about Anne Frank. And so I've actually been to Amsterdam. I've been to the place where she hid, she and her family. So I got to have that connection. I like to buy her book whenever I travel in different languages. So if you come to my office, you will see a stack of Diary of Anne Frank in different languages, just because that book made a difference in my life.
Would you say that that book brought you to where you are today in a lot of ways?
Yes, in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know. I've just reflected on it over the years, and it wasn't something that I thought about consciously, when I was 20 or when I was 25 or in my first job. But as I reflected, I started to realize that's what started my journey. And so I thank Anne Frank for, she's influenced millions of people around the world. And I hope you can read the book. You can come to my
Yes.
office sometime and see if you read in any of the languages that I have. I think I have it in Serbian and in different languages like that. Let me let my dog in. One moment.
Okay. No worries.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay. So yeah, you were saying that it left such a huge impact in like the entirety of your life from that point in time. Were there any specifics in that book that just grabbed you in a certain way, or like led you to take that path?
No, I think that, her life, she and her family were in hiding. They were in this house and they were in secret in this house. No one could know they were there, because if they knew they were there, they would be taken to a concentration camp or killed immediately. And then the family that shielded them would also be affected. So that hasn't happened to me, obviously, in my life. But it's something that I think that we are closer than we think in our society to that sort of thing, right? When we hear the rhetoric, when we hear what people say about each other, politically, et cetera, either in this country or in other countries. And there are countries where these types of genocides are happening. So while I specifically have not been through that, I believe that we are closer than we think in our pretty society that is modern. And we think that we are, sort of looking to the future, but, we're closer than we think to disaster, in my viewpoint. Because we see what happens in different places around the world. And we see even here in our own country, we have migrants at the border who I believe will be, in a couple of decades, they will be writing books about being in these compartments and having nothing and being separated from their families. And they didn't have a great choice in many cases. They were escaping something, and then they come here, and this is what happens. So while it's not me directly, Anne Frank, but it is closer and it's all around us. And I think we have to be vigilant, you know. And it connects to journalism because it connects to communication, it connects to story, it connects to telling our stories and hearing other people's stories of what is happening. Uh, Not fiction, but what is real.
Mm, gotcha. And I was just reading your bio on the UCO website, and correct me if I'm wrong, but did your professional career start in 1990, or is
Oh
it
no, it
earlier?
started before that.
Oh, okay.
Actually, yes. I started. Well, again, I always like to say I started when I was 13, when I was in eighth grade. But my first professional job was actually my first year out of high school. I
Oh,
had an
wow. Okay.
opportunity to work at my local television station in my hometown. And so I worked there while I was going to college. And I worked there three different times, because I worked there while I lived in my hometown, which is Fort Smith, Arkansas, uh, KHBS TV. Then I went to OU and finished up. That took me 2 years. But in between, over the summer, I went back to my hometown station. And I also, when I graduated from OU, my number one place to work was my place where I knew these people. And so that's when I started, which was about 10 years earlier, actually. So
Okay.
I've been in the industry for really a long time, longer than most who are my age, because I started so early. Most people start when they graduate from college, and I started, right out of high school.
Right. Mm. And in that sort of progression of these decades, have you noticed, or I'm sure you've noticed this, but like, how has the rhetoric in media changed over time? Or has it been the same throughout?
Well, I'll talk a little bit from personal experience. When I started in the 80s, it was an honor. You know, people in my family were, they were so proud of me for working at the TV station because there weren't very many people who did this job. It's very few, and remember, this was before cell phones. This was before we had this, and so the only people who had cameras were these very expensive. I mean, thousands of dollars. It costs thousands of dollars to buy a video camera, and nowadays we all have this, and so nobody had that technology except the people at the TV station. So you'd show up with a big camera. I mean, it was like gigantic, sitting on your shoulder, and everybody would hover around and they would come up to you and they would want to be on camera. They would wave and they would be friendly and they'd say, "Talk to me, talk to me." And then they'd rush home and they would want to see themselves on the newscast because, again, they didn't have a computer like this. They didn't have a device where they could immediately see their video or their image. And so it was amazing. It was sort of just like a celebration every time you showed up somewhere. Yeah, if you're showing up to talk to the, excuse me. That's the mailman arriving.
Gotcha. No worries. It's all good.
I have two dogs. One is deaf and elderly. One is my son's dog, and she's very active. And when she barks, he starts barking, even though he can't really hear. He can hear her. So excuse us.
It's all good. No worries.
All right. Hopefully they're almost finished. But anyway, it was different. It was a different time. It was, yes, if you were, what I was about to say is if you were about to interview the guy that was just arrested, he didn't want to be on camera. But fast forward to today, or fast forward even through the decades, and for a lot of reasons, the media has been vilified. It's to the benefit of politicians to sort of downplay the media and to make it the bad guy. Because if the media is the bad guy, then they can't be the bad guy. Journalism is not perfect. There are bad journalists. There are people who have made mistakes. The media is not perfect by any stretch. But all of those things over time have contributed now to a situation where I teach this and my students go out into the world and they're hounded by people. The dynamic has shifted. Television stations, in some cases, don't even do live shots now because they don't want to make their journalists sitting targets. In some places in the United States, in some communities with some groups of people, to hurt a journalist would be a badge of honor, to ruin a story, to ruin a live shot, to say a bad word in the middle of a recording. They would be proud of themselves.
Yeah.
So that is just a very short way of explaining how things have changed and really gone from one extreme to another.
And I'm sure even the motivation of these media companies has changed over time. Would you say so? Or has it been the same consistently?
Well, we have different forms of media now. So when you say media company, I mean, first of all, what I say is everyone is in the media now. You're in the media. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, you may hate the media, but guess what? You're part of it. You are it. So you hate yourself in that case. So, media company, what is a media company? Well, Facebook is a media company. Uh, you know, we have local organizations here. We have KWTV, which is owned locally. So it's a media company. We have large, huge companies that own multiple TV stations and multiple newspapers, conglomerates. Those are media companies. And then we have media companies that are sort of political in nature, that they have decided, and this I do not agree with. They've decided that they can get more viewers and more readers if they are partisan, because humans want to hear what they want to hear, right? Mm-hmm. They go where they're comfortable, and research shows us this. So people assimilate to the positions and the things that they agree with. That makes them feel really good. And it makes them feel very uncomfortable when they start to hear positions they disagree with. So that has led to this, frankly, a profit margin. People can make money by pandering, is the word I use, to people who want to hear certain viewpoints. And this is not the journalism I teach. This is not the journalism I grew up with. This is not what my mentors have taught me. This is not what we teach. So, as much as I think the bad guys, the guys that want to sort of take away media respect, they do not want there to be a different voice. And so if they can marginalize that voice, they feel like they've won. And so, I'm constantly reminding people of how I teach, which is fairness, objectivity, lack of bias, accuracy, adherence to the facts, to the truth as much as we can. Truth is not one thing all the time. Your truth right now and my truth are very different. You're in a different room than I'm in, but we're in the same presence. We would have two different tales that we would tell about this same experience. So truth is slippery, but we try to get as close as we can to that, understanding that it is difficult to get there. But that's kind of what I teach. And yes, to answer your question, the companies have changed over time, certain ones. There are a few that are still, trying to adhere to this middle ground and this accurate representation of what is happening.
Right. I think you just read my mind there, because I was thinking about the word truth. Like, that was going to be my next question. And you just mentioned there that truth is very slippery. But this is a question more from a historical standpoint. I'm not originally from the United States, so for you personally, in this career that you've had, have you seen an inflection point that led to the change where journalism became less about the pursuit of truth and more about pandering to people?
I really think that a large part of it, and I think that we would want to really look at research to find these exact moments, because we could actually probably trace the first clickbait. That would be the thing I would want to do. If this were my area of research, I would want to go find that first headline that we might call clickbait. Promising more than it delivered, sexy, I've got to read this, it's gossip. Someone figured that out. So I believe that to a great extent, we've always had this, okay? We've always had, whether it was the first printing press and a pamphlet that someone printed with an interesting headline and they realized we can sell more this way. It's always been with us. It's not like, 1999, that was the first day. But it became much more pronounced and able to be in volume and so much easier. Right now, I'm looking at my MacBook Pro. So I'm thinking of websites. Again, I'm thinking of clickbait. I'm thinking of social media. I'm thinking of people who, spread interesting things that aren't necessarily true. So I believe that digital media has exacerbated the issue.
I see. Okay. And do you think that social media has a huge role to play in sort of amplifying that?
Yes, because it can be done so much more quickly with one button. We can talk to millions of people. And there's a great saying, and I think that it gets incorrectly ascribed to different people, but that a lie travels around the world before the truth can even put it on its pants. you know, so the idea that it's so, it's like wildfire. And so, yes, digital media, social media channels, social media sites, websites, uh, video, viral videos, things like that can spread so quickly where, if you look back at any time, any place in time, you say, well, how quickly could the telegraph have spread that rumor? Well, it's going to take a while. It's going to take several days, where, gee, today it's like, boom, you know, and it's kind of like it for media literacy. When you see something trending, really what's important is to say to yourself, okay, is that true? First, okay, I see this thing trending. I see that someone has died who is important and famous. Where's the information coming from? And that's what the consumer can do right off the bat, is to counter it and to help themselves, is to say, where'd that come from? So if you see something on Facebook and it's like, oh, don't park beside a white car, they're going to kidnap you. I mean, women get these all the time. And it's like, gosh, where'd that come from? Who started that? And you can actually go to places like Snopes and do research to sort of track things down. But most consumers don't have time for that. So, but there are quick and easy things you can do, which is simply, where'd it come from? And if it starts to seem slippery, like, we don't know who that picture really is. It's supposedly the illegitimate daughter of X political person. And then it turns out it's a stock photo of a girl from Utah, So
Yeah.
that's the thing, there's the reality, and then what can you do about it?
And in this sort of, and this next question is going to be based off of your experience, because if I'm, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that you analyzed ratings for different news companies in your past as well. So in that time, did you notice, like, I mean, I'm sure that there were certain things that people gravitated to more than others, but how did the ratings tend to affect viewership, and how did it tend to affect those who were behind the scenes? Is there a difference in terms of?
Well, okay. So what I'll say is, I was very involved in doing audience research in different local communities for media companies. And so the research is one thing and the ratings are another thing. They're two separate things, even though they sound very similar. And so, but the ratings, Nielsen is the company, the gold standard, affect frankly, the financial well-being of the media companies, okay, whether it's radio or television. Because for better, for worse, Nielsen measures audience viewership, okay? So who's number one, who's number two, who gets the most viewers? The research that I worked on was frankly more accurate because the data was exactly representing the demographics of that community, where it's complicated, but the ratings, they will do something like, it's called weighting the data to multiply out. Like, let's say they didn't get enough Hispanic people in the ratings, they multiply until they get to the right percentage. Where with the research, we would actually get exactly 100 Hispanic people if that's what the community dictated. Does that make sense? So with the research, it was perfectly done for the demographics from a gender standpoint, from a race, from a geographic standpoint. And so, if we were doing research in this market, we wouldn't want just people from Oklahoma City. We would want people from Elk City and people from Shawnee. And we would make sure in a research standpoint. So back to your question, I think what you were asking was, how did this affect the people behind the scenes or the people who worked in the newsroom? Is that what you're asking?
Both, kind of people that watching the news and people who are putting
Okay.
the news out.
So what I think is so cool about research is, especially if you work in media. So imagine this. Imagine that right now we had a focus group watching your podcast, giving feedback. Like, I like that. I don't like it when he does this. I didn't like that question. That's boring. Wow, you would be fascinated, right? To learn, gosh, if I do more of this, I'll get more listeners or viewers. That's what research tells us. And so research has an ugly side too, because when we think about clickbait and things like that, and not that we did that type of research at that time, but it can be used for ill. It can be used for bad. But as a journalist, I like using it for good. And so what happens for the audience is the audience gets to say, we would do things like say, here's all the content. Here's every bit of different types of content that we can possibly cover: crime, education, health, weather, sports. List it out. Now, which one is your top one? Which one do you want to see more coverage of? And of course, I can tell you this, it's no secret. The number one content area in most parts of the United States, and I would say maybe the world, if we were to take it out that far, is weather, right? Weather affects all of us. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, Democrat or Republican, whether you go to OU, UCO, or OSU, it's like, it doesn't matter. The tornado doesn't care if you're rich or poor. And so weather is number one. So, okay, it's great to know that. Now we can know where to put our resources. If we only have this much money to spend on new equipment, we're probably going to buy weather equipment to do a better job of forecasting. So that's what the research does. It's really important for strategy. And I was just actually reviewing some research that I was involved in a few years ago. And it was specifically done, it was focus group research. So it was people in the room. And it was specifically done for a morning newscast. And one of the things we learned from that research was regarding Amber Alerts. Amber Alerts were relatively new at the time. And of course, I think you know what an Amber Alert is with children and missing children. And what the people in the focus group told us was that the Amber Alert was from several communities away. It wasn't even in our viewing area, but the people in the focus group said that should be at the top. That should be your top story, even though it's several communities away, because we might know something. The other thing in reviewing this other research that I looked at was they say very simple things like, we want more local news. It's very simple. It's not rocket science. But sometimes news executives and journalists need to hear that. They need to hear that, let's analyze what you're doing. You don't, whether you're a newspaper or a radio station, you don't have a lot of local news. It's all stuff from the National, or it's from AP, or it's from CNN, or whatever. So we learn very simple things, but it's valuable because sometimes you learn from audiences things that news people wouldn't think about. We're too removed from the audience. We're too removed from being normal or average. A lot of journalists think that it's crime, right? Crime is easy to cover. But the viewer might be saying, I need more education news. Certainly during COVID, you would have seen medical. And it changes over time as well. So that's a little peek into research.
This might be a slightly ignorant question, but do you think that research is sort of waned away now, maybe more from a national news perspective, because of the way that the news is put out? Everybody's just running for the breaking news element that they can put out, or am I just not?
Are you saying has the research is sort of not as important anymore because everyone is kind of doing the same thing anyway? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, something along those lines, yes.
Well, I think that here's the deal. We couldn't have predicted there would be a pandemic, right? I mean, yeah, we could have predicted it. We knew these things are going to happen. But did we know it was going to be in 2019, start in 2019 through this time period? And did we know, what it was going to do? No, we didn't know that. We didn't have a crystal ball. Did we know that 9/11 was going to happen? No, it was sort of a shock. Yes, if you're an intelligence, State Department, Pentagon person, yes, there was chatter, and yes, they should have been more on top of it. But my point is, we have these huge things, and these are United States focused topics. Anywhere around the world, you can pick different things that have happened that were unexpected. That changes news consumption habits. So after 9/11, before 9/11, if you were to ask people in research, are you interested in national or international news among all these other topics? Those things would be very low on the list. People were more focused on local. But after this big thing happened, this big terror attack, and then fear of other terror attacks in other cities across the world, international and national popped up higher on the list. Organizations currently are doing research and have done research on COVID and what do people need to know and want to know about COVID. And the thing is that behaviors change over time. Climate change is occurring. And so there will be communities that have not really had severe weather. I just told you weather is number one. So there will be communities where maybe their news practitioners aren't very aggressive at covering weather. People are spoiled in Oklahoma. Anytime there's a dark cloud, there's live coverage. But in other parts of the country, it's not like that. But climate change could change their weather pattern. And so their viewers could shift in their preferences and their needs. So that is something we have to be vigilant about is viewers change over time. The other thing, again, I keep showing you my phone, but because of this, certain topics are not as important anymore. I can pull out my phone and I can actually see a lot of content. I don't have to wait for a newscast to see it. So when I do turn on a newscast, I expect it to be fresh, updated, future thinking, make me smarter, help me in my life. And so all this stuff is change, audience change over time, audiences change. Right. And so nothing is stable. You can never think, oh, let's just cover breaking news. No, because COVID is here and it's not just breaking news. It is breaking, but it's also affecting us long-term and economically in various ways.
That's sort of fascinating in the sense that, like you said, audiences change, their interests change, and what they want to watch changes and so on. Does it change for a reporter behind the scenes?
Well, that's why research is important because, if you're a 45-year-old reporter and maybe for years you've been told breaking news, breaking news, breaking news and crime. We get new research in and it's national, international, and more weather. We have to change. We have to be educated about what we do. Because the other thing about newsrooms, I think people have this image that there's 100 people sitting there ready to go cover a story. Often in our newsrooms, we may have seven reporters today, and that's it. We may have fewer reporters. On the weekend, there's maybe one, maybe two in Oklahoma City covering all the news in our city. Yeah, you may have a couple of photographers around too. We don't have a lot of people. So we have to be very judicious about what content they're going to cover. We're not going to go cover the Arts Fest today if we've got a triple murder, right? And we've only got one reporter. Which story are we going to cover? Or we've got a tornado. We're going to send everybody on that. So we don't have a lot of resources. And so, yes, reporters have to be educated by their management because management is the group that has the research. They're the ones that get the research, and research is private. We're very careful about sharing it because we don't want our competition to get our research because it costs us a lot of money to get it. So we want to hold it very privately. So it's important that staff members inside news organizations become educated about what the local research is showing.
And does this sort of malleability of reporters behind the scenes affect them psychologically in some way?
Well, I think that reporters are always being affected psychologically by many factors. Okay, so this topic, let's talk about this topic.
Yes.
This is a typical management topic because it's us against them, right? It's the staff against management. So here's management. They've got another research project. They're telling us more stuff and reporters are remember, they're people, they don't believe everything they hear. Reporters can be very difficult because their job is to ask hard questions. Their job is to find information. And so they work with these managers who sometimes don't want to actually give them information. So yes, that is affecting them psychologically. It can, if not handled correctly, they can become very bitter about their jobs. They can become where they dislike their manager, their boss. They can become sort of disillusioned, like, okay, now what are they telling us? Last year it was crime. This year it's health. Now what are we supposed to be doing? And that's just the nature of it. But I think we all just have to take a little, what I'd call a chill pill, and relax and realize we're here for the audience. We're here for the people. We're not here for me. We're not here for the reporter. We're not here for the manager. We're here for the audience. That's who we serve. And I think that helps everybody get their head straight.
Mm. Do you think that that sense of knowing that you're here for the audience is drifting away, or not drifting away necessarily, but do you think that that gets affected because of our own personal agendas, or like own personal agendas of the reporters?
Well, I think we have to be vigilant constantly. We're human. Reporters are human. They're not robots, right?
Yes.
So only a robot could be completely devoid of any viewpoints. Reporters and journalists are 100%, as we speak, yes, they are trying a few robotic kind of things, but blood and bone and skin. They're human. And humans make mistakes, but that's not what I want to focus on here. We have lives. So some reporters are parents. They have children. So they're going to be thinking of things. They're going to have story ideas that come out of the fact that they have a child and they've been to the doctor, or they've been to the playground, or they've been to school. Others may have a sick parent. Another may have struggled in their lives to pay the bills, maybe had to struggle through college and, didn't have someone paying for their college education. So they're going to look at things through the framework of that socioeconomic standpoint. So we all bring that to the table. And if you hire well and you hire in diverse ways, it's actually a benefit, because I'm not going to just hire white males who are privileged, right? That's the old days. That's how newsrooms looked in the old days. So if I hire a bunch of white men who are privileged and went to, Ivy League schools and were in fraternities, I'm going to get a certain kind of news coverage, right? It's going to be very male centric. It's going to be not very sensitive, most likely. It's, they're not certainly going to be looking at, if we're talking about buying a house, they may go to the wealthy neighborhood instead of the lower socioeconomic area. And that's the story. And all of a sudden you're not connecting with your audience. So we hire well, we hire diversely, we make sure that our newsroom reflects the community. So if I'm in a community that is 15%, Black population, I want to make sure my newsroom looks like that. If I'm in a 80% Hispanic market, I want to have 80%. I honestly want to have 80% Hispanic employees. I want to be gender balanced. I want to be sexual orientation balanced. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's kind of hard because in hiring, we can't ask certain questions. We can't say, are you gay? But boy, if we happen to know that, and we happen to know that we don't have a gay person in our newsroom, doesn't that open the door to a different way of looking at things? So we want to be balanced. So in our hiring, we can actually turn what you asked to an advantage, that we bring all these experience. And it also occurs with religious and faith orientation. Because again, if you have all 100% Christian people in the newsroom, are you really going to be looking at topics about religious persecution in an open-minded way? Can you cover a Mormon, candidate for office and the conversations that come around that? Can you cover, the Muslim community and things that are happening that are hateful, hate acts in our community, even though it may be a smaller population? So that is when I was in a hiring role, as much as I possibly could control, I was trying to hire for diversity. And I'm really proud of the hiring that I was able to do, when I was in that role. And I currently, certainly promote that, and certainly encourage newsrooms to look at who is in your newsroom and make sure that you are balanced. But beyond that, so your question, I think, was, do people sort of bring their own baggage and their own thoughts, and it's kind of about them? So beyond that, we have to be vigilant to that. We have to be aware that that is human. And I always use the example of having a baby. I worked with a reporter who, as I was a young woman, and we had a lot of young women in our newsroom, and this young lady had a baby. And afterward, every time she showed up and gave story ideas, they all had to do with babies: diapers, discounts, safety, car seats, food, recalls. And it was like, okay, here she comes again. We know you're going to give us a baby idea again today. And we kind of marginalized her. And that's what happens to people. So I think there's this idea that people in newsrooms sit around and, set agendas and, well, how are we going to make Trump look bad today? No, if you do that, you're going to be marginalized. It's going to be, gosh, we know where she stands. We know she hates Trump. So we know that everything she brings up is going to be negative Trump. They stop listening to you. And so in order to prevent that, you have to you have to use your research. You have to know your audience. You have to know who our target is, because sometimes in our news, we also have targets. We may say we are targeting female audiences, because if we get our female numbers up, our ratings will go up. So it could be that we all come together and we sort of think of content like that. We're like, well, what would women think about this topic? How are women handling COVID in their family? Because women, we know, deal more with medical in their families. So anyway, that's kind of a brief on how I see that.
And with the sort of news stories that people then have to, or reporters have to cover, again, like a lot of the times, I mean, after all, like you said, they're all human, and if they see something that really affects them psychologically, it can put them in difficult places. Because I'm a forensic science major, and a lot of things that you tend to see in class, or you might see down the road, are not going to be the most palatable things you see. So from your perspective of being behind the scenes, how do reporters disconnect from those things? Mm-hmm. Of like trying to, I mean, I'm sure it's a lot harder to avoid it, but are there ways that management helps disconnect these reporters from these things, or how does that work?
Well, that's a big question. So you asked, how do they disconnect? How do managers help them? So again, we get back to the word human. We're all different. And so different people disconnect in different ways. And so it could be that some can't disconnect. Speaking for myself, I couldn't disconnect from my work, because news is 24 hours a day, right? And so I found that it was to my best interest to be informed when I arrived at work, which meant that I was consuming a lot of news. I was working in news, and then I was going home and consuming news. I would get in my car, turn on news radio, make sure we didn't miss anything, get home, turn on our channel to make sure everything was cool, and then maybe take a break, eat dinner, then watch the 10 o'clock news again. and get up and watch more news. So that was my style. And that's old school. That was very old school before we were really talking about the topic of psychological well-being. Otherwise, different people do different things. Some people do things that are not healthy. They have addictive behaviors. They may drink. They may use drugs. They may exercise to an addictive level. They may do some things that are not in their best interest, but it's how they disconnect. Other people have ways of disconnecting that they find helpful, that our research tells us is helpful. Things such as definitely unplugging, definitely taking a break from this. So, nowadays, the other thing is for reporters and people who are on air, who are even print journalists, they now have 100% connection to their audience, right? The audience can simply connect to them directly. And a lot of times what the audience is saying is really hateful. So imagine that you go home and you're relaxing and you look at this, and all that there is people telling you that you don't look good today. Why are you wearing your makeup like that? Or you're biased, or why are you covering that story? Or we hate you, or you're a failed beauty queen, whatever. That's not very good for your mental health. And so the idea of disconnecting is good. The idea of maybe even not allowing comments, because there will be those trolls. There will be those terrible people that want you to hurt. So that's another thing. Spirituality is something that some people find to be healing. So whether it's meditation, whether it's religion, whether it's prayer, whether it's, their form of being spiritual, that is helpful. We know that peer support is also very helpful. So having a trusted friend, colleague who you can talk to. Speaking for myself and speaking for a number of journalists from a research standpoint, we like talking to people who understand. We like talking to people who know what we're going through. So one thing that's really hard is if you're a journalist and you're working hard, you're working, long hours, tough topics, you may not be able to go home and talk to your spouse about it. You may not be able to talk to a parent or a loved one because they haven't worked in the industry. They may give you advice that doesn't work, like, well, take the day off. Well, no, I can't. A tornado just hit. I can't take the day off. But talking to a colleague who understands and is going through the same thing can be very healing. So there are different things and different ways that people can take more control of their emotions within this. And those are a few examples. Now, you ask about management. Can management help? Yes. Research tells us that having an empathetic manager is also helpful to our mental health. So an empathetic leader, someone who doesn't just sit in their office all day with the door closed and doesn't want you to come and knock on their door. Someone that actually may come out of their office and come and sit by you and talk to you. Someone who knows their people, who knows that they can look at you today and you don't look like yourself. You look down, And so, but again, I have to know you. How I approach you may be different than how I approach someone else in the newsroom. Maybe I know that you like to talk. You're an open person. You love to visit. You love to talk, and that helps you. There may be someone else who's very quiet, who doesn't want the boss to come and sit by them. So the boss has to be empathetic and reflective and thoughtful about the people in the newsroom. I believe, in my own research, I call I have recommendations for organizations that are different than what is currently happening. I believe that employees need to be onboarded into organizations with the concept of mental health in mind. I think that the day you're hired, you should have a kit of information for resources, counseling, for a mentor, for training, so that you can take control of all of this yourself. and not take control using alcohol or harmful ways of dealing with it. So those are some things that I've learned along the way.
And your thesis was about the sort of studying the trauma associated with journalism.
My dissertation.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes. Your dissertation. Yes.
Yes.
So, was there something that fascinated you while doing that research, which you hadn't even thought about while you were learning about it?
Well, what drew me to it was the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay. So having worked through that time myself, I just was returning to that subject. And while I did the research, so my research started with the National Memorial here in Oklahoma City has interviewed a number of local journalists, including myself. And when I was being interviewed, I realized, wow, who else are they interviewing? Well, at that time, and probably as of today even, they had interviewed about 60 people. And so the transcripts of those interviews are at the National Memorial. And I thought, wow, what if I could get my hands on those transcripts and analyze that? What would I learn? And more specifically, I was interested in management. Okay. So I was able to get permission from the memorial to get those transcripts. They're all right here in my computer as we speak. And I was able to study them. And I studied them with this topic in mind of what can we learn from this event to have better newsrooms, to have better leadership and management of during these types of events. And so you asked, was there something maybe that surprised me as I came through this research? And so that was what you call data set. My first data set was the transcripts. So my second data set was after analyzing those transcripts, then I said, okay, now what I want to do is I want to talk to every organizational leader in Oklahoma City at the time of the bombing who worked through this specific timeline. And I was able to interview 13 people. Every single person I wanted to interview agreed to interview with me. They include news directors, general managers, editors of the newspaper. And there were qualifications to be in this group. So I interviewed all of them, and I was interested in whether they had observed symptoms of PTSD in their staff. So I named off the symptoms. I had a certain number of questions, and then it was also kind of open-ended where they could also talk. And here's what I learned that I did not realize going in. It wasn't what I was looking for. I learned that the managers also experienced trauma. I learned that it's not just the people on the ground who are at the bomb site, who are with the families and seeing stuff. It's the people behind the scenes also. They have different form of trauma, but it can be very similar. And as we are learning, there is other research that is starting to focus on people behind the scenes, people like video editors who are working with video all day long. They edit video all day long. They can experience PTSD symptoms. And so, of course, the same can be true for leaders and managers. And what was kind of unusual about this type of trauma is some of it involves the idea that I am a leader dispatching the crew out to the scene. And so if my crew runs into trouble or runs into something bad, I might feel responsible. I dispatch them. So during the bombing, one of the things that happened was after maybe a couple of hours into the event, it happened at 9:02 a.m. and our crews got to the scene, and then there were a couple of bomb scares. And so what happened was these emergency people started telling, crews and everyone who was down there, run, there's another bomb. And in that moment, people feared for their lives. A bomb had just gone off downtown. Okay. 168 people died. And we didn't know that at the time, but the building was clearly blown up. And now I'm right there and I'm being told there's another bomb. I could die right now. The person who sent me down there is watching and they're thinking, oh my gosh, my employee could die right now. They're running. They're scared. There could be another bomb. There probably is another bomb. Thankfully, there was not. That causes trauma to all involved. So those were some of the things that sort of were aha moments, because none of our research has really focused on leaders. And I'm not trying to focus on leaders to say, oh, these poor leaders and these poor managers. I'm trying to make recommendations to newsrooms so that leaders can do a better job of helping support their staffs. But that was one of the aha moments that I did not expect.
Speaking of trauma, and I understand that there's a fine line between a sense of mental or like a toxic nature towards mental health and building a space of mental toughness.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you think mental toughness is? I mean, and I'm sure that journalists tend to have that space because the amount of coverage that they have to do or like present a certain news story, I'm sure that it has to be very high for journalists in general, but is there a certain way that it is fostered behind the scenes, or is it just a person to person? I mean, I'm sure. So I'm sort of lost in thoughts in terms of asking this question, and I apologize. But how does the concept of mental toxicity versus mental toughness affect all of this?
Well, I think that's a really good question that we have not answered as an industry very well. Okay. So when you talk about journalists and you talk about newsrooms and you talk about fostering behind the scenes, what I think about, what a lot of people would be visualizing is they would be visualizing CNN or NBC or Fox News. I'm visualizing communities in the United States that most people have never heard of. Dothan, Alabama, Bozeman, Montana, Harrisonburg, Virginia. These are communities with TV stations. And I speak of TV because that's my area. That's where our young journalists start. Okay, they start in these tiny markets. And in those tiny markets, do you think that their manager is very experienced? No. Their manager is probably brand new. Their manager has had no training at being a manager. Their manager may have been a good reporter, okay, and just got promoted. Their manager doesn't know anything about trauma or how to manage people. So you have these people go to these little tiny towns, where, again, any day in any place in the world, there can be a traumatic story happening. And it may not be the big bomb and it may not be the big terror attack. It could be a small thing that sets somebody off, a fatal car accident. So when you ask that question, and that's what I'm visualizing, what I can tell you is that no, they are not this is not being fostered behind the scenes. Very little is being fostered behind the scenes at this time. There are horror stories that young people will tell you about their first jobs. I've actually done some research on first-year journalists. And so we're not doing a very good job at this in the industry. And we have to understand why we're not doing a very good job. And the reason is because these managers are not trained. They're not trained or maybe the corporation says, well, we're going to do manager training. It's 2 days, 2 days. And it doesn't cover mental health, So you have that. The other thing you have when you think about mental toughness is you have people coming from different situations. So one thing that we know about trauma and PTSD, for example, is that people who have experienced trauma in their lives, journalists, are more susceptible to PTSD in their work. So if you've had a traumatic event, an assault, a rape, something like that in your early years, and then you go to work, you are more susceptible to PTSD in journalism. So you have different individuals coming to these organizations with different life experiences. So everybody's all over the place. I think we could maybe look at the idea of being mentally tough. Resilient is the word we use there. It's people who kind of can heal themselves through different forms. And people are at different levels. People don't come in like, okay, you're all at 50%. Now let's get, some people are at 25, some people are at 50, some people are at 75 on that level of resilience based on what they know about it, how they've been trained, what their previous life experience is. But we do know that resilience can be learned a bit. And so that's something that, again, I would want to promote, but it's hard. Again, when you think about entry level journalism, funding is low, time is scarce, turnover is high. So that young manager that wasn't very good, guess what? They just got hired in a bigger city. They're gone now. Now we're getting another person who's not very good, so that's the reality. And so it's really easy for me to sit here and make recommendations and say, this is what you ought to do. But the harder thing is to actually understand what's the reality is on the ground.
And yeah, I guess it could be encapsulated by saying that it's easier said than done, right?
Yes. Yeah.
As much as
that's what I love, frankly, about my own experience is I've done the work. I know the problem areas. I see it now. My students are entering it. I'm hearing about it. They're contacting me and saying, do you know what happened to me today? And so I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm saying that some people who do this kind of research, they've never worked in a small market television station, so their visual is Dallas, or Las Vegas or Washington, D.C., a newsroom they've walked into. I would say everybody that does research on this topic needs to go to Odessa, Texas and Yuma, Arizona and places like that. Then they will truly understand what we're up against.
Could you draw a picture a little more about this sort of difference between these smaller news stations versus the conglomerates that we see in CNN and Fox?
Sure. I mean, the facility may not be very nice. It may be an old building with horrible air conditioning, so you may have that. The budget may not be very big. So even if you are part of a conglomerate and you're in a small city, do you think you're at the front of the pack? Do you think you're the one that is going to get the funding at the beginning? No, you're last. It may be very small, so that we may have 2 reporters today. And I'm not joking. This is not an exaggeration. We may have 2 reporters in the newsroom. And so breaking news occurs and, oh my goodness, now what? So it's all hands on deck. You may have the manager getting out covering news, which you would not see here in Oklahoma City or at CNN by chance. So those are just a couple of examples, and then you put COVID on top of this. And so many people in the past year have been working at home and they've been working remotely, which I think was a smart choice. It was smart to, distance. But that has affected people's mental health. Some people do not operate well on their own like that. That is not their style. And they've been hurt emotionally. So you've got that on top of all of this other stuff right now. So those are just a couple of examples. You think about CNN or NPR or the Washington Post. They do these wonderful workshops where they can bring in the best of the best in the country to do training. So, a couple times a year, these employees get training from, leaders who teach about leadership or management or trauma or, writing, for example. So they're getting that kind of coaching and investment. That's kind of the difference, So the Washington, D.C. reporter is getting fed, with stuff. And the guy in Yuma is just trying to get out of there, just trying to get another job as fast as he or she can, because they're not being fed anything. They're just being, chewed up and spit out, basically used up. So for someone outside the business, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Oh, no. That did make sense. And I was going to ask, in that case, is there like a huge drop off in terms of like first year journalists who then are like, this is not me. This is not what I visualized before I came in here.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who, and this is something that I am really mindful of as a teacher, is it is not all rainbows and sunshine and candy, in the world. It's hard. And I have a student I just talked to last night. He's embarking on his first professional job out in another town, in another state. And, he's been with this support network here on the UCO campus. And I said, you are going to have some hard days. And I tell everybody who will listen to me, who are students, is you are going to have days that you second guess yourself. You are going to have days where you want to quit your job right now. The best thing you can think of is I can quit my job right now. And what I tell people is that's normal. That is normal. It is hard. This is a hard job. It is a job for some people that involves appearance. You will be told by your managers, cut your hair, wear different makeup. I don't like your jacket. You're a man. Hey, you're balding. Your hair is falling out. Let's put some powder on your head, because it's shiny. If you don't like that, this is not the business for you. This is not the business for you. You will be told how they want you to look in a lot of ways. So some of this is I can prepare people ahead. And we do talk about trauma in my classes. I try to bring it into every class I teach, different levels of it. Early classes get just basic, very basic. What is trauma? The research I did with first year journalists, they said, I don't even really understand what trauma is. Everyone's talking about trauma this, trauma that. What is it? Do I have it? So we simply talk about definitions. So those are some things that, I think about with this when we talk about it. So I'm not sure if I answered that thoroughly.
No, you most certainly did. But based off of that, I was going to ask, you said like how there are some students who are not necessarily aware of trauma, or they see certain things and they're not. It's just, they just start to think that it's not for them. This question might be slightly external, but the incident with Jamal Khashoggi, who is a Saudi Arabian journalist, such a worldwide story in how, like, everything that happened with him. How does that affect, from your own perspective, of course, how do you think that an incident like that affects a prospective journalist or a journalist who's in a newsroom today reporting something about a Saudi Arabia or in Iraq or so on?
I see it kind of two ways. I see it on one hand, just very short and sweet. It doesn't affect them necessarily. They don't think it's them. That guy's from Saudi Arabia. That's not me. I'm here in Oklahoma. I'm safe. Or I'm in New York City. I'm safe. Or blah, blah, blah. So on one hand, I think there are a lot of journalists that don't, while they're upset by it, they're heartbroken by it, would do everything they could to fight against it. It's not them. It's not me. It's not where I am. On the other hand, it gets back to the thing we talked about at the very beginning. Anne Frank. While that has never happened to me, it has not happened to most of us. I believe it's not that far away. We have to be vigilant. So on the other hand, I do think there are the fighters. There are the people who are going to say this is wrong, even though he is from Saudi Arabia originally. That doesn't make it right by any stretch. But my point is, even though it may not seem like it could happen to me, here in the United States, there are the people who are the fighters, the people who are going to keep his name out there, the people who are going to say, you know what? I'm maybe 3 steps from that. Right? I mean, what if somebody who wanted to be a hero to a mob said, I'm going to kill a journalist? That could then start something. So I see it those two ways. And I think that there is a duality in journalism, by the way. We are trained to see these two, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. And so we consider things in that way. And that's how I see that, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I was just going to mention there is a documentary that sort of puts everything together in terms of like how leading up to his death, things like that. It's called The Dissident, and it's
Mm-hmm.
by Brian Fogel. So have
Okay.
you heard about that
I
documentary?
haven't. I will have to check it out.
Yeah,
Did
I
you
believe it's
watch? You liked
on.
it?
I did. I actually watched it twice because it was so
Wow.
fascinating to me. And it's like you said, it's very heartbreaking to watch it, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it does give you a lot of background to the deeper roots of the problem that was associated with the whole case. But and you brought back what we were talking about initially about Anne Frank, and my parting question before we head into the latter stages of this podcast was going to be, it's maybe slightly deeper, but do you think that your experience of reading the Diary of Anne Frank and the sort of trauma that she spoke about led you to be more curious about learning about the trauma of journalists in general? Now, I know you said that Oklahoma City, the bombing was what sort of
Mm-hmm.
motivated you towards it, but internally speaking, and I'm the kind of person that likes thinking or like sort of observing these connections. So, just out of that curiosity, do you think that that was the connection that led you to research what you have?
I think that's a really interesting question. Um, I do believe that I am drawn to darkness. I am drawn to that. Um, why is that? I think, yes, I do think that as a young person, I was formed by my education, I was formed by my life. Um, and it started with some of those readings. As a journalism student in high school, I was drawn to the news. And so I was drawn to, before, even before I got into the business as a young person, Watergate, and those types of political stories. Um, and then, of course, being in the news business, there is a lot of darkness that we cover and a lot of thought that goes into that. From my perspective, I was a producer quite a lot, and so that meant I put the show together, and I had to decide what was my lead story and what was page 2 and what was page 3 and all the content in the show. And of course, I was covering dark things and I was around these dark topics. And as a result, when I see things like TV shows or I read books that are sort of romance novels or chick flicks or rom-coms, they don't ring true a lot of times. It's like, that's not life. Life is ugly. Life is dark. Life has a dark side. It has a light side. And but I can't abide by things that are artificial, like I said in the beginning. And so that darkness that I've been around in my life, just like, different people in different professions, has formed what I require and what I think about and what I want to think about. And I don't want to think about, like I said, a rom com or a romance novel. That's not beneficial to me, nor do I think it's beneficial to society. I want to think about the hard things. I want to go to the hard places. That's what I like. I like having a problem that is really difficult and then thinking about how to solve it. And I have had to do that a lot in my career in the news business, because we get in a lot of tight spaces and a lot of impossible decisions that have to be made. And that is what I like. I think I'm a lot of fun and I know how to laugh and I can make a joke, but I will also run to the difficult things, because that's where I'm most gratified, I think, in my career and in my kind of problem solving. And I also think, I've been around the block. I have a lot of experience. And I think that when you get there in your life and you've spent decades on something and around something, you owe it to society to take all that experience and do something with it, not just, rest on your laurels and go lay out in the sun somewhere, and that's just how I think. I mean, those are just a few little tidbits of, into my mind. And even in my dissertation, I think I had a line in there in my foreword. I said, there is darkness here, but there is light, because the light represented all the good that we can learn and that we can put forward and we can execute and we can use. And so I kind of think about that line I wrote, and, it helps me, kind of figure out sort of my direction.
Well, that was really beautiful, and that was a beautiful way to sort of cap off this section of the podcast. So we're going to transition, and first of all, thank you so much for answering those questions. We're going to transition into the word association game that I was talking about off air. I will give you some context to it.
Okay.
So I call it Bish, Bash, Bosh, and the reason that is because I'm a soccer fan, and a lot of soccer players tend to make a kicking sound, or I remember watching this video where somebody kicked the ball and made a sound, Bosh. And this one day, like, words just clicked in my head, and I was like, oh, I should make that a word association game on this podcast that I want to start. So basically, I will give you 5 words.
Okay.
And to those 5 words, you have to respond to each of those words in 3 different words or different phrases. So, for example,
so you'll say one word and then I say 3 things. You're going to give me an example.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
So if I was to say the word news, what are the 3 things that come to your mind? That's sort of the
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, this is recurring. Oh, the words are the same words that I ask everybody on the podcast, and this is just a way for me to see how, even though we have different perspectives and respond to them differently, there are a lot of connections to the way that we respond to them rather.
Okay.
So the first word is differences. What comes to your mind when I say the word differences?
I think beauty. I think challenge. I think controversy.
Interesting. I haven't gotten controversy so far, so that's an interesting choice there. But the second word is... Oh, wait. What's the second word? I forgot what the second word is. This is the second time that this is happening, and that's awkward. But I'll transition into the third word, which is learning. What comes to your mind when I say the word learning?
Lifelong, exciting, curiosity.
Okay. The second word is back now.
Okay.
And that's nuance. What comes to your mind when I say the word nuance?
Ooh. That's weird. I'm thinking of, when you say nuance, I'm thinking of a shell, like a seashell. I'm thinking of lace. I'm thinking of whisper.
Interesting.
I don't know. I just sometimes words sound a certain way to me. They're separate from their meaning, but nuance. I thought seashell. I don't know. I just visualized a seashell when you said it.
And I guess that's the beautiful thing about us as people, that we connect to these words so differently. So that's awesome, and that's definitely a first. But the fourth word is empathy. What comes to your mind when I say the word empathy?
I think of care, support, love.
Beautiful. And the last word for this segment is similarities.
And on
what
empathy,
comes to your mind when I say...
Listen, I just want to say about empathy.
Yes,
it was something I wrote about in my dissertation. So I actually studied the word and the definition of it. And I probably wrote a sentence in my dissertation that said empathy is comprised of, love and care and support, so that was on my mind. Okay, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, it's all good. It's all good. No worries. Thank you for the added context. The last word is similarities. What comes to your mind when I say the word similarities?
Human. I'm trying not to think too hard. There's something on the tip of my brain. Experience. Breathing. We all breathe.
Yes.
I really am
yes, and that's what
literally.
keeps us alive.
Yes, I'm thinking literally on this.
Yes. No, but that's awesome. You've closed this off beautifully. Thank you so much for playing along on this section of the podcast. Just two more questions. Well, the last one's not really a question. And this has sort of turned into a shtick where I say the same thing on every episode. But
Okay.
the first word, or the first question rather, is how do you relate to people? And the reason I ask that is the name of the channel that this podcast or goes on to on YouTube is Random Relatability. And for me, I believe that we relate to each other in a lot of ways, even though we are maybe Democrat or Republican,
Mhm.
left or right, etc., etc. So for you, from a personal perspective, how do you relate to people?
I love that. I think about that a lot. I listen, we're together right now, you and I. And so I am, to me, and it's like you're looking at me and you're thinking things about me. I'm a lot older than you are. But in my mind, I am your age. I feel this way as a teacher with my students is I feel like I'm slightly older than my students, like a couple of years older, like you know what I mean. um, and so I don't think of myself and my age or my body or whatever. I am like, here with you. And that's one thing, which is maybe more me centric, that you may be looking and saying, gosh, I wonder how old she is, and I'm thinking, gosh, I feel like I'm, as young as he is. But there's this really great quote by Star Wars, Carrie Fisher. And, she died, of course, and she was, probably in her late 60s, I think, when that happened. But she described her face. She said, my body is my brain bag. My body is what takes my brain to see interesting things and places. And I love that quote because it's kind of like what we really are is our brain. Excuse me.
No problem.
But sorry about the dog barking,
It's
is
okay.
that, that's what we are is our brain. And I talk about artificiality. This is just what's taking our brain around. And so that's kind of what I like to think about and I like to see is just that. And then, when I see, clearly I have a lot of different kinds of students. I have people from all over the world. I have people of everything, gender, religion. And it's just like trying to look into their brain. And through a lot of the student work, they write things to me. They write like discussions and they ask me questions and they tell me things. And I'm seeing that. I'm not seeing what's in their face. I'm not saying, gosh, he's skinny or he's cute or he's overweight or he's, not cute, whatever. I'm seeing what they're writing. And that's what forges that connection. And so that's kind of how I reflect on that sometimes, is because I'm really proud of my connection with my students. And I think I'm good at that. And I sometimes I think, why do I feel like I'm good at this? Well, because I'm trying to see what's beyond this.
Yes, and I've definitely heard that about you from one of your students, Amanda Hughes. So um,
And I'm not
that
trying to
was very
brag. I'm
profound.
not trying to brag about it. It's a constant. Sometimes I don't have a connection with someone, and I think about it. I'm like, why am I not connecting with that person? And so it's something I'm always trying to make better, you know. So anyway, yeah.
No, it's okay. But that thought is really profound in many ways, and I'm thankful for you bringing that up. So thank you for sharing that. And the last question, which is not really a question, it's more of a request, is for you to just leave us with a positive thought or a positive quote or a message that you'd like to leave for everybody who's listening and watching.
I think that what I would say is I alluded to this earlier, is when you get out into the world, it's going to be hard. And there could be students watching right now. There could be professionals watching. There could be people at a lot of different places in their lives who are participating. And give it a chance. give it another day. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was it was after my son was born, and I didn't know if I could keep doing the job I was doing because I was traveling, and it was so hard to leave my baby to go on a trip. And I told my boss, I don't know that I can do this. And he said, let's just take it 1 week at a time. That saved me. It saved my job because I said, okay, let me get through this week. And then I had a few days break and I was like, okay, I can do this. And so now that's like my mantra. I tell people this when they're having a tough time. And sometimes, depending on how tough your time is, you've got to take it 1 minute at a time. You know, if it's kind of a challenge, 1 week at a time. Sometimes it's an hour. Take it 1 hour at a time. You can get through the next hour. And so that's my little positive. I mean, again, my darkness of I always go to a dark place to come to the positive, but I think that's helpful to a lot of people.
It most certainly is. And this episode in a whole has been very knowledgeable and very, very profound in a lot of ways for me. And I hope that it is the same for everybody who's watching and listening. So thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for joining me.
Can I ask you 3 questions? Because I come from
journalism. Oh, yes, please do. Please do.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to do word association with 1 word for you. Okay? You're going to tell me the 3 things that come to mind. You ready?
Okay. Yes.
The word is words. Words.
The word is words?
Yes.
Okay. Meaning, thought, and wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, good. What is your guilty pleasure?
Oh, I am a foodie, so I would say, well, I don't know if that counts as a guilty pleasure, though. Need to give this one some thought. I don't know, I guess a pint of ice cream. Like, I can sit down and finish a whole pint.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, and then the last one is, what was the last song you listened to?
What was the last song I listened to? It was actually a song that was playing on a commercial. Mm-hmm. I forget what the name of the song is because I heard it in a commercial. Mm-hmm. Wait, no, but that was just a blurb of it. But
you like the song?
Did I like the song?
Yeah.
It was an interesting song because, like, I hadn't heard anything like that nature, and I don't listen to anything of that kind. Uh-huh. But yeah, listening to it through that commercial, I was like, it was an Apple commercial. I think it was like an Apple
They always have good music in their advertisements. They pick really good stuff. So
they do. I'm going to link it below if I find it on the description notes. Okay. But yeah, I forget. It's Mystery Lady or something like that. Okay. But yeah, it's an interesting song. So yeah.
All right. Okay, good. Okay. Those were my questions. I could go on, but we'll keep it at 3. 3 is a good number.
Okay. Well, but I appreciate you asking those questions. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for joining me. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. This was really good. I look forward to, I hope I see you around campus. Will I see you?
Yeah.
Okay. Come and see us. Come over to the news area and come and see us.
Most definitely. Thank you so much. And for those of you listening and watching, I hope you take away a lot from this. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. Make sure to follow Dr. Hill on her Twitter account and mention some things in the comment section below that you found interesting, intriguing, or relatable about this conversation. Make sure to also check the description box below for other sources of information and content that we've talked about today. Like this video, share it around, and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to never miss another episode. I continue to beat this drum every week, but I'm really thankful to you if you watched the entirety of this episode. It's because of people like you that this project is possible, because we get to discuss about different opinions and share different perspectives and learn about things that we were probably never aware of. So thank you so much for being a part of this platoon of perspectives, if you will. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and don't forget to keep your mind open to different perspectives, because you never know, random relatability might just be around the corner.